I came into the NFL differently than most quarterbacks. I had already been through the Naval Academy, served my time, and learned what pressure felt like before I ever took a snap for Dallas. So when I talk about the greatest players I ever saw, I am not talking about highlight reels or numbers on a page. I am talking about the men who changed the way you prepared on Monday because you knew you had to face them on Sunday. I remember sitting in meetings with Coach Landry, watching film, and feeling the room get quieter when certain players came on the screen. That told you everything. Greatness had a presence. It made you more disciplined. It made you honest about your own weaknesses. These 5 men did that to me. Some were teammates. Some were opponents. One I only watched from a distance. But every one of them changed how I understood football. The first player I have to talk about is Fran Tarkenton. Now, Fran and I were different in a lot of ways, but I understood exactly what made him dangerous. He could turn a broken play into the most important play of the game. Back then, quarterbacks were not protected the way they are today. When you left the pocket, you were taking a real chance. Defensive linemen could hit you hard, linebackers could close fast, and there was no guarantee you were getting back up without feeling it. Fran still kept moving. He would spin away from one man, retreat 10 yards, change direction, and somehow find a receiver downfield. People called it scrambling, but that word never fully explained what he was doing. There was thought behind it. He was buying time while still reading the field. That takes courage, but it also takes discipline. I respected that because I knew what it felt like when a play broke down and the structure disappeared. You had maybe 2 seconds to decide whether to run, throw, or protect the football. Fran lived in those moments. He made chaos look like part of the playbook. I remember preparing for Minnesota and seeing how uncomfortable he made defenses. You could not rush him carelessly because he would escape. You could not sit back because he would find the opening. And you could not assume the play was over just because he was running toward the sideline. He might stop, turn his shoulders, and throw across the field. That was dangerous football, but Fran had the confidence to do it. He trusted his instincts. More importantly, his teammates trusted those instincts too. Receivers kept working because they knew the ball might still come. Linemen kept blocking because the play could last twice as long as expected. That kind of quarterback changes the habits of an entire offense. The game people still ask me about happened on the 28th of December, 1975 in Minnesota. It was a divisional playoff game, and we were down 14-10 late in the fourth quarter. We needed something extraordinary. I threw the ball deep to Drew Pearson, and Drew made the catch that later became connected with the phrase Hail Mary. Everybody remembers that play, and I understand why. But what I remember just as clearly is the tension before it. We knew Minnesota was never finished as long as Fran Tarkenton had a chance to touch the football again. That was the respect he commanded. Even after we took the lead, nobody on our sideline relaxed. Fran had spent his career proving that he could create something from nothing. I also understood him because I had my own way of extending plays. I never wanted to run just to run. I wanted to keep the defense under pressure and give the play another chance to succeed. Fran had been doing that before I became an NFL starter. He showed people that a quarterback did not always have to stand perfectly still in the pocket to control a game. He could move, react, and still make intelligent decisions. That sounds normal now because the position has changed so much, but in Fran's era, it was unusual. What impressed me most was his toughness. He was not the biggest man on the field, and he played against defenders who wanted to punish him every time he moved outside the pocket. He kept coming back. He kept taking chances. He kept believing he could make the next play. That belief spread through his team. Fran Tarkenton taught the league that improvisation could be a form of leadership. When the plan failed, he did not panic. He created another plan in real time. I always admired that. A quarterback is judged most clearly when everything around him stops working, and Fran was one of the best I ever saw at keeping a football game alive. The next player I want to talk about is Bob Lilly. When I arrived in Dallas in 1969, I was not a typical rookie. I was 27 years old. I had been through the Naval Academy, served in the Navy, and spent years waiting for my chance to play professional football. I thought I understood discipline. Then I walked into that Cowboys locker room and watched Bob Lilly work. He did not give speeches every day. He did not need to remind anybody who he was. The way he practiced, the way he studied, and the way he carried himself told you everything. Bob was already the standard in Dallas. The rest of us were trying to meet it. People remember the strength, and they should. Bob could control a blocker with his hands, keep his balance, and still find the football. But what made him special was not just power. He understood leverage. He understood angles. He could feel where a play was going before the offensive lineman had fully committed. When you watched him from the sideline, you saw a man who never wasted movement. There was nothing wild about the way he played. Every step had a purpose. Every rush was connected to the defense around him. That mattered to me because Coach Landry demanded precision. Bob Lilly was the perfect example of what that system looked like when a great player accepted responsibility for every detail. By the time I became our starting quarterback, Dallas had already lived with the disappointment of being called next year's champions. We had been close. We had talented teams, but close does not mean much when the season ends without a championship. Bob had carried that frustration longer than I had. I could see it in him. He never complained about it, but he understood what was missing. We needed to finish. That is why Super Bowl VI on the 16th of January, 1972, still means so much to me. We played the Miami Dolphins in New Orleans, and our defense controlled that game from the beginning. Miami scored only 3 points. I was fortunate enough to be named the game's most valuable player, but when I remember that afternoon, I remember how our defense made everything possible. We could stay patient on offense because Bob and those men kept giving us control of the field. There was one play that captured Bob better than any speech ever could. Miami quarterback Bob Grease dropped back, felt pressure, and started retreating. He kept moving backward trying to escape. Most defensive linemen would have slowed down or assumed somebody else would finish the play. Bob kept chasing him. He drove Grease farther and farther behind the line till he finally brought him down for a loss of 29 yards. From the sideline, it almost looked impossible. A defensive tackle was not supposed to pursue a quarterback that far. Bob did it because he never believed his responsibility ended until the play was over. That was who he was every day. He did not stop when the easy part was finished. He completed the job. Young players noticed that. Veterans noticed it too. When your best player works like that, nobody else has an excuse. Bob created accountability without saying much at all. I have been called Captain America over the years, and I have always appreciated what people meant by that. But when I first came to Dallas, Bob Lilly was the man who showed me what leadership in professional football really looked like. He did not lead through image. He led through consistency. He showed up. He prepared. He did his assignment. Then he did a little more than anyone expected. That first championship changed the Cowboys, but it did not change Bob. He remained the same quiet, dependable man. That may be the greatest compliment I can give him. Success did not make him careless. Recognition did not make him selfish. He continued to play for the men beside him. Bob Lilly was one of the greatest players I ever saw because he made excellence feel like an obligation. When you stood near him, you understood that talent was only the beginning. What mattered was what you did with it every single day. The next player I want to talk about is Joe Greene. When we prepared for Pittsburgh, Joe was one of the first names that came up in the meeting room. You could not treat him like another defensive tackle. If you did, the entire play could be ruined before it had a chance to develop. Joe could push the pocket straight back into the quarterback, and that kind of pressure changes everything. Pressure from the outside gives you a chance to step forward. Pressure from the middle takes that space away. Suddenly your feet are crowded, your vision is interrupted, and the timing you worked on all week disappears. Joe had the strength to do that, but he also had the intelligence to understand exactly where the weakness in a protection would appear. I remember watching film with Coach Landry and seeing how often Joe affected plays without making the tackle himself. He might force the guard to turn his shoulders early. He might make the center hesitate. He might draw two blockers and create an opening for Jack Lambert or one of the outside rushers. That was the problem with the Steelers. You could not focus on one man without creating trouble somewhere else. But Joe was the center of it. He gave that defense its identity. He played with anger, but it was not careless anger. It was controlled. He knew what he was doing. We faced Pittsburgh in Super Bowl X on the 18th of January, 1976. That game still stays with me because we had chances. We led 10-7 after 3 quarters, and we believed we could finish it. But Pittsburgh kept tightening the game. Their defense made every possession feel shorter. You felt as though one mistake could decide everything. Joe was in the middle of that pressure, collapsing the space and forcing us to speed up decisions. Late in the game, we still had an opportunity. I threw toward the end zone on the final play, and Glenn Edwards intercepted it. We lost 21-17. Those are the games a quarterback carries for a long time because you replay every decision. But when I look back at that game, I also understood how much Pittsburgh's defense had affected our rhythm. Joe Greene was not just winning individual battles. He was influencing the way we called the game. Then we saw them again in Super Bowl 13 on the 21st of January, 1979. That was one of the greatest Super Bowls ever played, but it was painful from our side. We lost 35-31. I threw for 228 yards and 3 touchdowns, and we scored twice late to make it close, but close was not enough. Pittsburgh had built just enough of a lead, and their defense had made enough plays when it mattered. Joe did not need to sack me on every series to control the game. I had to know where he was before every snap. Our linemen had to communicate constantly. Sometimes we changed the protection because of him. Sometimes I had to release the ball earlier than I wanted. That is how you measure a truly dominant defensive player. He does not only defeat the man across from him, he changes the behavior of the entire offense. What I respected most was that Joe never disappeared in important games. Some players look dominant in September and become ordinary when the pressure rises. Joe became more dangerous. The bigger the moment, the more physical and focused he seemed. I never enjoyed seeing him across the line, but I respected him completely. Joe Greene taught me that one great defensive player could control a game without touching the football. He could take away time, confidence, and space. For a quarterback, those are the 3 things you need most. Joe had a way of taking all 3 before the ball was even snapped. The next player I want to talk about is Terry Bradshaw. Terry and I were compared many times because we played quarterback for the 2 teams that defined much of the 1970s. Dallas and Pittsburgh were always discussed together. People talked about our defenses, our coaches, our Super Bowl records, and eventually they talked about which quarterback they trusted more. I never spent much time thinking about it that way. When I looked at Terry, I saw a man with one of the strongest arms I had ever seen and the courage to use it when the game was at its most dangerous. He was willing to stand in the pocket, wait for a deep route to develop, and accept the hit that came with the throw. That is not something statistics explain very well. A quarterback knows what it means when the protection is breaking down and he still has to hold the ball for 1 more second. People remember Terry as funny and outspoken. They remember the personality he showed later on television. But the quarterback we faced was serious, physical, and fearless. He had gone through difficult years early in his career. Pittsburgh had not immediately accepted him. He made mistakes. He was criticized. At times he even lost his starting job. But none of that took away his confidence. By the time we met him in the Super Bowl, he had learned how to recover from a bad play without carrying it into the next one. That is one of the hardest things for any quarterback to master. In Super Bowl 10 on the 18th of January, 1976, we led Pittsburgh 10-7 after 3 quarters. It felt like the kind of game Dallas could control. Our defense was playing well, and every possession mattered. Then Terry made the throw that changed everything. Lynn Swann ran deep, Terry stayed in the pocket, and he delivered the ball more than 60 yards for a touchdown. Larry Cole hit him just after the release. Terry went down and did not even get to watch Swann complete the play. That moment told me a great deal about him. He knew the hit was coming. He knew the game might be decided by whether he released that football on time. He stayed there and made the throw anyway. We lost that game 21-17. I had one final chance, but my last pass into the end zone was intercepted. That loss stayed with me. Quarterbacks remember the opportunities that disappear. Still, when I watched the film, I had to respect the throw Terry made. It was not safe. It was not easy. It was a championship throw. 3 years later, we met again in Super Bowl 13. That time, Terry was even better. He threw for 318 yards and 4 touchdowns, and Pittsburgh beat us 35-31. We had prepared for their running game and the strength of their defense, but Terry attacked us downfield. He trusted Swann and John Stallworth, and he kept throwing even when our defense knew what was coming. That is confidence at the highest level. It is one thing to have a strong arm. It is another thing to use it correctly when millions of people are watching, and the championship depends on every decision. We fought back late in that game. We scored 2 touchdowns in the fourth quarter and gave ourselves a chance, but Pittsburgh had done enough. Terry had done enough. Losing another Super Bowl to the same quarterback was difficult, and I would be dishonest if I said those defeats stopped hurting. Competitors do not forget games like that, but the pain also makes the respect more meaningful. I did not admire Terry because somebody told me he was great. I saw him make the throws that defeated us. He was not always graceful. He did not play the position in a quiet or delicate way. He played quarterback with the mentality of a football player who happened to have a tremendous right arm. He absorbed punishment, stood back up, and kept attacking. Pittsburgh's defense gave him opportunities, but Terry still had to convert them. 4 Super Bowl championships do not happen because a quarterback simply stays out of the way. When I think about Terry Bradshaw now, I do not think about comparisons. I think about the courage it took to throw deep against a strong defense with the championship on the line. Terry never seemed interested in protecting his reputation during those moments. He wanted to win the game. That is why he belongs among the greatest players I ever saw. And finally, the greatest football player I ever saw was Jim Brown. This might surprise some people because Jim and I never played against each other in the NFL. He retired after the 1965 season, and I did not join the Dallas Cowboys until 1969 after completing my service in the Navy. But greatness is not limited to the players you line up against. Sometimes it is measured by the players who shape the way you understand the game long before you ever become part of it. Jim Brown was that player for me. I still remember watching him when I was a young man and trying to understand how one running back could make the game look so different. Every defense knew Cleveland wanted to give them the football. There were no secrets. There were no surprises. The Browns were going to hand the ball to number 32, and everyone in the stadium knew it. Somehow it rarely mattered. Jim would hit the line with incredible power bounce outside if he needed to break the first tackle, and suddenly turn what looked like a routine run into another long game. There was nothing flashy about the way he carried himself. He simply imposed his will on the game. When I won the Heisman Trophy at Navy in 1963, Jim was already the standard every football player talked about. That same season, he rushed for 186, 3 yards in only 14 games, one of the greatest rushing seasons the league had ever seen. Those numbers were remarkable, but what impressed me even more was how he earned them. Defensive football in the early 1960s was brutally physical. Running backs absorbed punishment on almost every carry. Jim never seemed intimidated by any defender. He welcomed contact because he believed he would finish the collision moving forward. I paid attention to the way older players talked about him. They did not describe him with excitement. They described him with respect. There is a difference. Excitement fades after a few days. Respect stays with you for decades. That is exactly what happened with Jim Brown. Years after he retired, men who had played against him still spoke about how impossible it was to bring him down when he built momentum. Defensive backs rarely tackled him alone. Linebackers often needed help. Even outstanding defenders admitted that one mistake in their angle could turn into another 20 yards. Then came the 1,964 NFL championship game. Cleveland shut out the Baltimore Colts 27-0 to win the title. People sometimes forget how dominant the Colts had been that season. Yet, when the championship was on the line, Jim Brown once again became the center of everything Cleveland wanted to do. That victory completed one of the greatest championship runs of his career and strengthened his reputation as the most complete running back of his era. What always stayed with me was the way Jim carried himself after the whistle. He was never interested in drawing attention to himself. He handed the football to the official and walked back to the huddle. That attitude reminded me of lessons I had learned at the Naval Academy. Do your job, respect your teammates, prepare for the next play. Football has always been the ultimate team game, and Jim understood that even while standing above everyone else. As my own career developed, I played with and against many Hall of Fame players. I shared the field with extraordinary quarterbacks, dominant defenders, and gifted receivers. Every one of them earned my admiration. But whenever someone asked me to think about pure greatness, my mind always returned to Jim Brown. He combined strength, speed, balance, intelligence, and consistency in a way I had never seen before. He did not need complicated offenses or favorable situations. He simply performed at an extraordinary level year after year. Looking back now, I believe every generation has players who redefine what is possible. Jim Brown was one of those rare men. he changed expectations for every running back who followed him. He proved that one player could carry the weight of an entire offense and still perform under enormous pressure. I never had the privilege of competing against him, but I never needed to. Watching him, studying him, and hearing the respect he earned from the toughest men in football was enough. For me, Jim Brown was not just the greatest running back I ever saw. He was the greatest football player I ever saw. Looking back now, I realize those 5 men taught me 5 different lessons about greatness. Fran Tarkenton showed me that a quarterback could keep a play alive long after the design had disappeared. Bob Lilly showed me that leadership was not something you announced. It was something you demonstrated every day. Joe Greene taught me that one defensive player could change an entire offensive plan before the ball was even snapped. Terry Bradshaw reminded me that courage at quarterback means standing in there and making the throw when you know the hit is coming. And Jim Brown showed me what complete dominance looked like. The game is different now. Players are faster, offenses are more complex, quarterbacks have more protection, and coaches have more information than we ever imagined. But the qualities that made those men great have not changed. Teammates still need someone they can trust. Coaches still need players who prepare honestly. Opponents still recognize the few men who force them to change everything. I was fortunate to play for Coach Landry, to wear the Dallas Cowboys uniform, and to share the field with some of the finest players in football history. I won championships, lost painful games, and learned that the difference between victory and defeat is often one decision, one block, or one throw. Statistics tell people what happened. Championships tell part of the story. But when you have stood in a huddle, looked across the line, and felt the presence of a truly great player, you understand that football remembers something deeper. It remembers the men who made everyone around them better.